Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about Zuckerberg admitting the White House pressured Meta to employ censorship, Brazil blocking access to X after Elon Musk refused court orders, Canadian government officials told to skip fraud prevention steps when vetting temporary foreign worker applications, the Liberals announcing 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, NDP poll numbers plummeting as Poilievre pressures Singh to break Liberal coalition and call an election, as well as a whistleblower coming forward to reveal a secret socialist plot to oust Danielle Smith from her leadership role.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get into it. So first off, we've got Zuckerberg admits Biden administration pressured him to censor COVID content, says it was wrong to suppress Hunter Biden laptop story. So Mark Zuckerberg acknowledged that Facebook was pressured by the Biden administration to censor COVID-19 content and admitted that it was wrong to suppress the New York Post's coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop. In a letter to House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, Zuckerberg detailed how senior Biden administration officials repeatedly pressured Meta to censor various types of content, including humor and satire related to the pandemic. Zuckerberg expressed regret over complying with these demands, stating, "I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it." He added that, with hindsight, some of the decisions made at the time would have been different. Zuckerberg assured that Meta has now implemented policies to prevent similar incidents in the future, emphasizing that the company will push back against any government pressure moving forward. Finally, Zuckerberg indicated that he would not be making another significant financial contribution to local elections as he had done in 2020 in an effort to remain neutral and avoid influencing future elections. So do you think Zuckerberg is genuine and wants to learn from his mistakes, or is simply throwing up a smokescreen?
I think this is actually pretty genuine. I think if anybody, we probably owe Elon Musk credit for the most part for kind of leading the way and being like, no, absolutely fuck these guys. I think that's significant. Also, I think we're seeing a bit of a changing of the tide too in terms of political lean. Some of these tech guys, some of the richer guys from like the Silicon Valley area. I think you're seeing it too with a lot of the crypto guys too that are leaning right. So I actually just think it's kind of a timing thing. I don't think he had the set of balls he needed to tell these guys to beat it when this happened, obviously. But now that we're seeing sort of a lean towards the right, I believe you're going to see a right-wing government. And it seems that Zuckerberg, while he's not outwardly saying, hey, I support Trump or I support the Republicans, it seems that that's the way he's going. And this is, to me, is an indication of that. But ultimately, I think we need to give Elon Musk credit for just showing these guys, like, hey, you can do this. You can push back against these guys. You've got enough money, power, and influence that you don't need to toe this line. So I think he's being genuine. I just don't think he was ever going to be the first guy through the door.
So I think a lot of this is actually owed to Vivek Ramaswamy. So he was mentioning how he ran into Zuckerberg at a UFC event and they got talking politics, as they probably would. And he brought up free speech and censorship and how big of an issue it was. And apparently Zuckerberg told him that he said something along the lines of, I think people would be very surprised at how actually pro-free speech I am. And Vivek kind of said, well, you know, it's great that you like those principles, but we've seen that, you know, that there has been censorship in the past with a political lean on Facebook. So you kind of have to do something if you want the public to understand that you're pro-free speech. You kind of have to do something in order for free speech. And then apparently it was like a week or two after they had that conversation at UFC that he went out and Vivek said to him, I think a public apology and also an acknowledgement that these things happened, other than just a little conversation that happened on Joe Rogan a while back, but like a formal declaration would go a long way. So, you know, who knows? Maybe this is one of those scenarios where he does have a guilty conscience over what happened in the 2020 leading up to the 2020 election and wants to right some of those wrongs.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of ended up in the same room taking a different door. right? Vivek very much represents the Republican Party. That's where a lot of that came from. I do like what Vivek is doing for the younger sort of audience, I guess you'd say. Let's say young leaders of today is maybe a better term. I think he's motivating a lot of these guys and mobilizing them to be like, hey, look, there's a better way to do this. And it's primarily because the Democrats have lost their way. And I think that can be hard to rationalize, especially people like our parents, right? Like, I don't know about your parents, but mine have been like lifetime Democrats, lifetime liberals. And they sort of have blinders on. I had a conversation with them on the weekend, and it was wild. It's like I was talking to an 8-year-old that wouldn't stop throwing a hissy fit. I was like, this is insane. So I made a rule when my wife and I left. We don't talk politics to my parents anymore. They can't be rational. They just can't do it. But the younger audience, the Zuckerbergs, the 40-year-olds, the 50, even the 50-year-olds, some of the 60-year-olds, parents are in their 70s, by the way. They can't seem to get there. So the younger people, though, they can. And it looks like guys like Vivek, they're kind of just highlighting, like, look, sure, we were all Democrats or traditional liberals at one time because it makes sense, but this is not where this party is. So I give him credit for kind of steering these guys in the right direction for sure. But again, it comes down to sort of that Republican pull. And I really do think, though, without Elon Musk being out there fighting this fight, I think guys would be nervous because they don't know what the ramifications look like. So I think it is sort of a combination of the two. I mean, that being said, though, like, look, him suppressing the laptop story, you could argue that won the election. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because also remember what happened with Hillary and the emails. It was one thing that came out just before, and that put her in a really bad spot. She's super unlikable, so I don't know how she was going to do otherwise, but that definitely knocked her down a few pegs for sure. And it looked like this one would have too, especially considering how much time they spent saying all these things about Trump, and now we've got this laptop on, Biden's son that's kind of corroborating evidence against him for the same thing they were kind of arguing against Trump. So you look at this, you're like, that could have been the end of the election right there. So I get the remorse thing and I can appreciate it. And I'm glad he's kind of poked his head up and good, like, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore. But there's still some very real life consequences to what he did. So I don't know. It's interesting. What are your thoughts there?
I believe there was actually polls done. I'd have to go relook them up because it's been a while since that instance. But I believe that there was actually polls done after the laptop story happened, the censorship thing, and they found out that it would have actually been enough to sway the election, that there was enough voters that would have said that this would have been a major issue, because it wasn't that they were censoring, for instance, Hunter Biden's connection to Burisma in Ukraine, the board that he sat on, which is obviously a pay-to-play kind of access. It's like, hey, Biden's son gets on a board and they pay him a hefty salary for sitting on it. And then
with no qualifications whatsoever.
No qualifications.
Other than doing finger painting and selling those for $500,000 or whatever, dude.
And on an energy company.
Yeah.
And then, so obviously this kickback was going to the Biden family. Now, I should say that there's also much talk about the Jared Kushner having a similar situation with the Saudis. But either way, the issue was that this would have come into public discussion if that laptop story was allowed to promulgate, but it wasn't. And so nobody got into this conversation about, wait, his son is sitting on foreign corporation boards that he has no qualifications for. Like, something's fishy is going on here.
100%. Now, one could argue, if you want to steal me on the other side, you could say, well, it was just Facebook and Instagram. There was still Twitter that suppressed it. The news suppressed it. Blah, 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 XYZ. What's the percentage of people that are going to be in this conversation that would have swayed their votes that are just using Facebook and Instagram, or that even use it? You know what I mean? So, I mean, I guess you could say, well, at the end of the day, who knows? But I think that's what it is. Who knows? It could have been enough. That's for me a bit of an issue, but it's interesting, right? Because there's sort of an admission of guilt here, but because it was to support the sitting party, no ramifications. But imagine that he had done that to support the Republican Party and had suppressed something like that, and then he also had to come out and admit that. I imagine that there would have been some sort of legal ramifications if he had done that. Which again, you sort of see this two-tiered, two-party justice system.
So yeah, I'm looking at here. There was multiple surveys. A person named Elise Stefanik, somebody from New York, a Republican from New York, claimed that 53% of Americans made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story would have changed their vote in 2020. However, Washington Post fact checkers later claimed that this was partially false. the same people that fact checked the Hunter Biden laptop story and claimed that it was false or Russian disinformation are now saying that, that if that would have changed people's minds, that also is misinformation. So it's so crazy that you can't even have any trust in these institutions anymore. I don't think you really ever could, but
I imagine you could have in the 60s, in the 50s. So. I think there was more. I think there was probably more objective reporting back then. I mean, maybe not. I mean, I don't know. I think you'd have to, for you to shake your head and say no, not at all. I think you have to watch some tapes. I think you have to know more.
Let's go back even further to the 1930s. The entire media apparatus in America was covering for the Soviet Union. You had famous instances of guys like Walter Duranty, who still to this day has a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting in the Soviet Union. He was a correspondent there, totally covering over the fact that there was mass famines happening there.
Yeah, so I'm
covering it up. And it was his reports that actually led to America claiming that the Soviet Union was recognizing them as a state and giving them statehood. And so those reports had a massive effect on the way that everything turned out for the century after that. And so going back as far as that, even I think we're just becoming more aware of the manipulation.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, except that I think there was probably a period, if I had to guess, that you sort of saw the growth and expansion of media through probably the 40s, 50s, 60s, when television was becoming more commonplace. You've got all these companies popping up, and a lot of these media companies are independent. So eventually what happens is there's sort of this cycle in business where everything's independent, then everything starts to merge. And you get, when it's just corporate merger stage, everything's on the back end. It's kind of like this thing you're seeing with social media. Governments don't worry about getting a hold of the apparatus until they realize how valuable the weapon is. So yes, I understand that they would have had control over the radio, and there would have been instances like the 30s when this would happen, 100%. But I do believe that there was probably periods where there was a lot of local news, a lot of news all over the country and in different countries in the West, where it was probably reasonably genuine and decent and independently owned. And then over time, again, it kind of got brought back into the fold of government controlled, mass corporation controlled, everything's in a corporate merger stage. And at that point, I agree totally. And it's not to say that things like that didn't happen in between those periods, but I imagine there was kind of a golden era where the scale was pretty rapid and the government didn't control everything, and they didn't need government funding because it was a new media outlet where they can make their money off ads and stuff like that back in the Mad Men era. So I imagine it was probably pretty reasonable for a while. And I think that's sort of what people like my parents anyway are still kind of running off of. But now I think it's 100% compromised. Now I don't think there's any room for much of anything other than propaganda.
I think it's comforting, and it can kind of be like a wanting to look at the past as kind of better than it currently is. I actually think it was more ripe for corruption back then because you had fewer corporations and fewer, like even back in the 60s, there was like 3 major networks in America. And you look at what the CIA was doing back then through like Operation Mockingbird and all of this, they had full programs dedicated to manipulating the American media. I mean, even go back to, so as far back as the Soviet Union, and then you look at what happened with the Iraq War and WMDs. Matt Taibbi outlines this in his book Hate Inc. really well, about how CIA officials had their favored journalists within these outlets, and they would go to them and give them reports. And it's not so much that like the CIA official goes to the reporter and says, you're going to lie about this, this, and this.
Yeah.
It's that the CIA reporter is also the CIA agent is also manipulating the reporter in the sense where there was internal documents where they were saying how let's give them this information we have on Iraq and purposely make the jargon in these reports so confusing that like the average layman couldn't think anything other than there would be WMDs in Iraq.
Right.
And so they were manipulating their own reports, and then they would give that to the journalists and say, here, report on this. We've got this. We did this internal audit or whatever. Right. And investigation.
Yep.
And then they run with it, just trusting these people when from top to bottom, they've been manipulating it the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, so Operation Mockingbird was started in the late 40s after World War II, and they were certainly using American media to manipulate their narratives for sure. But the thing is, they had journalists on payroll at that point, right? So they were controlling, you think 100% of it? See, I think they were probably controlling about 20-25% of it.
Oh, I don't think 100%, but I think when you have a few, you don't need 100%. You just need a few key players within the game.
Yeah. No,
That's
but
it.
yes and no. So if you think about the news in totality as a volume, if they're manipulating 20% of it to suit their narrative, well, okay, 20% of it's rot, it's corrupt, it's not true, it's propaganda. They're painting their picture because they need to for X, Y, and Z. But you still have 80% that may be genuinely true, or people being honest, and whatever it is. And it's being able to discern between the two is challenging. But I think what I'm saying is, sure, there's always corruption in a space like this, for sure. But I imagine, my guess is that it went from 5% to 10% to 20 to 40 to 60. And now I think you're less than 10% where there's just no propaganda or no lean in the news anymore. I think that's if you're lucky. That's kind of what I'm saying, is I think there was an era where you could trust the news because you could trust, if you're sitting there watching it and your parents are watching it, or my parents, and say it's the 70s, early 70s, maybe 60s, they could probably trust 75% of what they're hearing. You know what I mean? Like, okay, that's, you know what I mean? It's not an all or nothing area. I think there's a gray space here. But now I think you watch it and it's like, I listen to the things that my parents now parrot, and I'm like, it's kind of crazy. I had this kind of realization, and it sounds sort of dumb to say, but there's this big war on misinformation and disinformation. But what's crazy is everything they're telling me, and I check myself for confirmation bias. I do. Everything they're telling me, I'm like, all of that falls under those categories. Yeah. It's all false. And it's this thing, basically, what's that called when they use, they're like, it's not projecting, but they're kind of it's double speak, essentially. Right. And it's pretty wild because but they still use the same filter of, I can trust most of what's coming out of here. I check 2 sources, Jonathan. I know what I'm doing. It's like, well, no, 90% of it you can't anymore. But they're not willing to cross that bridge, right? Because they grew up in a time where they did have more trust.
I think maybe the agreement we could find is that on the bulk of things, yes, there's probably not information, but I think that bulk is what would be considered like inconsequential news when it's your local CP24 covering the dog fair that was going on at the street. You're like, yeah, you can probably trust the reporting that
trust that I'll be at that
thing,
dog fair,
because there's not because there's not going to be a major consequence one way or another. How people feel about it.
For sure.
But when it comes to massive international events or big picture things that the establishment would have some sort of
vested
stake
interest
in,
yeah,
I think then no matter the time frame, that those reportings would have been corrupted. I mean, you even go back to like ancient Greece, you can hear them talk about how, I think, I can't remember the playwright's name, but he was a famous playwright out of Greece. And he said, the first casualty in war is truth. Right. And it's one of those things that it's like, this is human nature at that point. But moving on to that battle against misinformation and disinformation that's going on. Brazil blocks X after Musk ignores court orders. So Brazil's Supreme Court ordered a nationwide block of X, formerly Twitter, after Elon Musk refused to suspend certain accounts as ordered by the court. Justice Alexander de Moraes led the charge, accusing Musk of allowing disinformation and hate speech. In response, Musk closed X's office in Brazil and accused the judge of censoring conservative voices. The court also froze assets of Musk's other business, Starlink, and imposed fines. This clash highlights Musk's push to make X a platform for free speech, even at the cost of legal and financial consequences. The situation raises concerns about balancing free speech and the rule of law, with broader implications for Musk's global strategy for X. So, can X remain financially afloat despite having advertising boycotts and now major countries blocking access to X, effectively limiting the user base by the 40 million monthly users that were found in Brazil?
Yeah, the thing is, the amount of money that is involved in Twitter for operations is peanuts compared to what Musk can maintain or manage. Not a big deal at all. What I find more concerning is how the world is behaving to a guy that's allowing free speech or allowing speech they don't like on a platform. So you have Brazil. Now, I think that Brazil could be in some trouble here. I don't understand enough about the amount of power their government has and the power their judicial system has. But if you freeze the assets of another publicly traded company being Starlink, if you're freezing those assets to cover the basis of another one, say X in this case, that is so insane. That's like saying, your cousin killed somebody, so I'm going to hold you hostage, or you have to go to jail for that. It's like, what are you talking about?
What's crazy?
That's Banana Republic shit.
So we're seeing this. This is a side note here for a second, but Tommy Robinson, there was an issue with mortgage fraud that a label that's been thrown at him over the last couple of years, and he was recently pointing out how that came from his brother. He lent his brother a certain amount of money, and then he made a certain amount of money back off of real estate that he purchased and didn't report it properly. I think I'm telling the story correctly. But then they started putting him in jail and giving him fines and all this shit for what his brother did.
This is insane.
Yeah.
This is what, if you get to this point in the world, there's nowhere that's safe. So if I'm a shareholder in SpaceX right now, and they are Starlink rather, and they are freezing the assets that I have in Brazil, the entire weight of the Western judicial system should come crashing down on Brazil. This is insane. It's absolutely bananas that they're allowed to do this. It's just weird that this is just a cockfight between two dudes with ego that have a lot of power and money. So for me, that's kind of nuts. But then, you ask about remaining financially afloat. I don't think the finances are an issue. But here's the problem you're going to have with X. You see what happened in France. Now they've arrested Duroff, and they're charging him with something that could put him in jail for 10 years, and he could have to pay 500 billion euros, I believe it was. 500 million euros, pardon me. Fine. That's what he's looking at right now. 10
and
years.
That's the CEO of Telegram.
Yeah, right. So now the thing that they had said is we're not above going after other people too. That was an underhanded poke at Elon Musk, because that came out later that they're like, well, he's not towing the line. He's not doing what we need him to do. Yeah, he's allowing free speech, guys. So now in France, it could be an issue, which would basically, if they did it in France, they would wrap him into the European Union. So then that would be a really big problem. Now, I don't know if you saw what Kamala Harris said the other day. It was her first interview that she clusterfucked her way through. And the idea of what she said was that America needs to put their foot on Elon Musk's neck as well when it comes to Twitter, because he shouldn't be allowed to play by a different set of rules, she said. They all need to basically toe the line of the government, or we need to take that back. We need to nationalize this program. And I'm like, okay, well, you're insane. What did you just say? But what I'm seeing though is you're looking at Brazil, Banana Republic, Europe now, France leading the way there, could end up ending X's operations there as well. And then America, if Kamala Harris gets in, could be another issue there altogether. So I don't know what this looks like for the platform, because it looks like Western governments are saying, yeah, we're just going to systematically take you out. So I don't know. Again, I don't really think it's a financial issue. It might be like a feasibility thing. Because too, if America does it, Canada, if Trudeau's around, he'll be like, yeah, me too. So everybody versus Trudeau. He will 100% do the same thing. So again, I'm not sure that it's really about the finances as much as it is he may be squeezed out by all the different governments around the world, and it looks like it's kind of moving in that direction. Don't know if it's going to happen, and I put my money on Musk in this fight, but that could be what's coming down the pipeline.
So when everybody looks at this and thinks, why are all of these countries on the same page? Why are they, have the same declared enemies? Why are they all censoring free speech in the name of protecting democracy? These things don't make sense. Like, where are these orders coming from? This comes from NATO. What is happening with NATO is they are industrializing censorship. This is what Mike Benz would call the censorship industrial complex, and how this organization sees right-wing populist movements, whether that be Donald Trump, whether that be Pierre Poilievre, whether that be Marie Le Pen, any of these outsiders from within the establishment, they see them as a threat to the global order. NATO has to be operating as one unit, right? And so whenever you have a NATO member starting to act out, that can cause strife within NATO itself. And so these orders are coming from NATO, and actually Mike Benz highlighted how, and he's a former ex-State Department official in America, and he pointed out how the Atlantic Council, which is a powerful military-funded American think tank stacked with ex-CIA heads, national security advisors, and State Department officials, they outlined what they saw as censorship-worthy speech under the guise of what they called the 4 Ds of disinformation. So it was dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. So according to them, disinformation isn't just about being factually wrong. It includes anything that dismisses their narrative, distorts their view of the truth, distracts from what they want you to focus on, or even if it is true, causes discomfort or unrest. So in other words, they believe that inconvenient truths deserve the label of disinformation. And so, we can see these things going through in Canada through Bill C-11 and 63. You already see them in the European Union. You start seeing them in Brazil now. And this is exactly where this Supreme Court judge got these powers from. So it was in 2022 that they granted him unilateral power to order tech companies to remove many online posts and videos. And they gave him these sweeping powers. They essentially gave him the status of dictator of truth, this unelected judge. And so what's interesting there is that Brazil got welcomed not as an official partner into NATO in 2019. Actually, Trump put them in as a non-military NATO ally.
Right.
So it's one of these things where it's like, okay, if you want to come into our security apparatus, if you want to become part of the global order, so to say, then, okay, these are the rules that you now must follow. And so, just like there would be certain security measures they would have to take place in trading or whatever, that kind of thing, if you wanted to be a part of NATO, well, now you have to implement these censorship plans.
So we're under attack by NATO.
Yeah.
Great.
Because this all happened after 2014 in Ukraine, when they did their color revolution in Ukraine and overthrew the pro-Russian government.
Yeah, the Euromaidan. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was even tapes from the Obama administration of them talking about who they were going to put in place once they overthrew the Russian leader and, okay, who's going to be pro-West. And so after they were successful with that color revolution, and then Crimea had their own referendum, and I'm sure Russia was doing informational warfare in that period to get them support as well. But that's where NATO realized, like, oh, even if we come in and forcefully overthrow a government, there's still this informational aspect that we need to. It's not just about guns anymore. And that's where Stoltenberg said the ex-head of or is he still the head of the NATO?
I think he's still, he's still head of NATO.
So he said that it's not, warfare isn't just tanks anymore, it's also tweets as well. And so that's where they were like, okay, for us to be competent and achieve our military goals, we also need to have a censorship complex.
It's interesting. I also think that it's funny because it feels like to me that they let Crimea go on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the thing is you let Crimea go, and at that point, you're going to get into a war with Russia because they're occupying the neutral state of Ukraine at that point. Also, they overthrew Crimea in a month and a half. And now with Western support, they can't do anything in Ukraine after almost 3 years. So yeah, I'm of the mind. Think about it. America is so deeply embedded in that conflict at that point. They're the ones that the information's available. They're responsible for the overthrow of the Euromaidan. They implement their own government, a government that's pro-West, and then they let Crimea go at the same time. There's no way, based on how they've behaved over the last 3 years over there, there's no way you could look at this and go, oh yeah, you guys let them take Crimea 100%, knowing it was going to lead to this conflict. That's how I see it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think there's also the possibility that they wanted Crimea, and then and this is why they implemented their entire censorship campaign, is because they couldn't get it because of the referendum that ended up happening there.
Yeah, but the thing is, if they took potentially, I guess the way I see it is he took it over so quickly within a month and a half. And the West has basically been imposing their will there for I don't know how long, but definitely since then, that I think they let him in the back door. That's my feeling. That's my feeling. Could be totally wrong, but that's kind of how I see it. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I guess the most important thing to take away from here is that it's just they use the exact same, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the UK, they all use the exact same justification. So like even in his order, what Musk refused to do that led to this whole situation was he refused to take down the accounts of people that were elected officials in Brazil,
yes,
senators and stuff.
Yeah.
And so in his order, Justice Moraes said that Mr. Musk was an outlaw who intended to allow massive spread of disinformation, hate speech, and attacks on the democratic rule of law, violating the free choice of the electorate by keeping voters away from real and accurate information.
Which is wild, because the thing is, this is so authoritarian, you shouldn't even be able to use the word democratic in that sentence. Like, you just should not be allowed to.
Yeah.
It's just wild double speak. Anyway, my point in saying why I think they kind of let Russia make that move. What the hypothesis that you sort of glean from that is, if they let him do that, if they were realizing like, hey, this is an information war, and they let him do that, that does leave the door open for them to then sort of start implementing these censorship tools. So I don't know whether they did or not, or how that worked out. But once he's in there, and then you see this as a problem, now you can implement this next set of, hey, we need to lock down this censorship and this communication stuff. Because if you look at what happened in the Middle East, the Arab Spring and that stuff, that was like 2012, that area. So I imagine at that point, they knew the value of information. They knew the value of how to sort of manipulate. And again, you kind of talked about this earlier. They've been controlling the media for 100 years. You kind of look at that and you go, they probably already knew. And I'm wondering if they let them take that as sort of a, well, we have to do this now because this is happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Yeah, it could be. All right, moving on. We've got Canadian government officers told to skip fraud prevention steps when vetting temporary foreign worker applications. The Trudeau government claims to be tightening control over the temporary foreign worker, or TFW, program due to widespread abuse, but an investigation uncovered that the government has actually been fast-tracking applications, cutting corners on essential fraud prevention measures. Beginning in January 2022, Employment and Social Development Canada, or ESDC, instructed staff to implement streamlining measures to speed up the approval process. These measures involved skipping routine checks, such as confirming that employers genuinely applied to hire a worker from Canada, ensuring lawyers and consultants were in good standing, and verifying the conditions promised to workers. Despite government assurances of stricter oversight, internal ESDC documents and interviews with a current employee reveal that these expedited processes have eroded safeguards, effectively turning the approval process into a rubber stamp. One ESDC employee, granted anonymity, described how about 50% of the usual checks have been abandoned under pressure to meet faster processing targets. So, do you trust the Trudeau government to be able to get the temporary foreign worker program under control?
I don't really trust the Trudeau government to do anything at this point. They've proven over the last 9, almost 10 years that whatever their task is, they will fuck it up. And honestly, like I had this question the other day to someone. I sort of posed this question. Tell me one thing that you think they've done that was a valuable addition to Canada. And no matter what you point at, I can poke a ton of holes in it. Now, that being said, you may be able to do the same with some conservative policies over the years, for sure. But in this perspective, or on this point, like he was going to curb temporary foreign workers. Instead, approvals doubled. He was going to, fix this, fix the housing, fix the economy, do whatever. It doesn't really matter what he points at. He kind of screws things up. It's all they've done. And I don't know how you even start to repair at this point. But specifically with this, their solution is actually going to make things worse. So not only do I not trust them, I actually know that their solution is going to make Canada worse. So rather than removing some of these temporary foreign workers, what they want to do is they want to make it easier for them to get permanent residency. So if you have too many temporary foreign workers, you just make them all permanents. This is only making things worse, because then you're going to free up the room you have as temporary foreign workers, allow more people in, then you have a fast track program to get them to permanent residence. So all you're going to do is increase immigration again, which this year will probably hit 1.5 million, which this country can't handle. So no, I really don't trust the Trudeau government to get this under control whatsoever.
Well, and even if you look back to when he was running in 2014 and 2015, Trudeau made claims and he criticized the Harper government for the temporary foreign worker program about the exact issues that it's currently causing, which is youth unemployment as well as wage stagnation. He said that this program contributes to those issues. And so if you implemented a policy and then that policy had negative consequences, and let's say 6 months, a year down the line, you could genuinely say, we didn't foresee this unintended consequence of this program, then you can understand that that situation would arise and you go, okay, cool, now get it under control. But the problems that that he says he's going to get under control right now are problems that he identified 10 years ago when it was politically favorable for him.
Right.
And so you can't tell me that you didn't know that these things were going to happen, that it wasn't going to cause youth unemployment to rise or wages to stagnate, because you acknowledged that fact over a decade ago and you only made it worse. So I don't see how you're sitting here now going, but now we understand these things and we're going to get it under control.
Well, this is the problem you have with anybody that's going to vote Liberal or Democrat right now. Well, they're going to fix these problems once they're in office, guys.
Yeah.
In Canada, they will have been in office for a decade and things have only gotten worse. They do not deserve another opportunity. And that was actually a much better way of putting what I was saying earlier. Trudeau identified a lot of these problems in his initial campaign or second campaign. We're going to fix this. We're going to fix that. He knew these things were there, and all he's done is make them worse. Not only has he not fixed them, he's made them worse. That's why the guy needs to go. And that's why I don't trust him to fix anything at this point.
And even you take the most generous stance from their position, which would probably be something along the lines of, well, even if this has some negative consequences for Canada, at least there's people in other parts of the world that are poverty stricken and don't have economic opportunity. At least we're giving them a chance. But then you look at how this program runs, and that's not like,
not at all the case.
You can't use that. You can't use that excuse, because what ends up happening, this isn't the case for all of the temporary workers, but a lot of them are taken advantage of because they pay tens of thousands of dollars to get their applications approved in this, and the lawyers' fees and the consultant fees.
A lot of times for jobs that were non-existent.
Exactly.
And then I guess you get into this other issue now where what did the UN say exactly? That it's
Canada is now a contemporary, a breeding ground for contemporary slavery.
And these are the temporary foreign workers. I mean, kind of no matter how you skin this, no matter how you look at it, it's a total disaster, and it's only gotten worse under Trudeau's watchful guise. So again, do you trust them to be able to fix anything at this point?
No. And I will say, when it comes to that UN report, I did go read and look through the report, and honestly, 90% of it was just stupid woke jargon about power differences and all of this, and
sure,
how that's what they were using. But there is some legitimate criticisms to be had of this program, which, yes, it is like, they know, for instance, when these foreign workers come in, a lot of them end up in agricultural and retail and low wage, low skill, say like Tim Hortons type jobs.
Right.
But what they were saying when it comes to stuff like in the agricultural sector is that they're able to provide them with worse off working conditions or force them to work longer, because these people know that their ability to stay in the country is tied to their ability to keep that job. And so I can actually see the one point the UN person was making in this, where it does create a unfair relationship, because that employer can then kind of hold that over their head of, well, don't do what I say, and you're headed back home then.
Exactly.
And so they can end up being put into really tough positions. And I know that even some of them with the agricultural space, sometimes they'll even give them living quarters and such, in that those living quarters are just trash as well.
For me, the thing is, right now, unemployment has gone up in Ontario. I think it was in 2023 by 25%. The unemployment, people that were on unemployment insurance or unemployment. So you look at that and you go, okay, that's the country saw a 10% rise. Ontario saw a 25% rise. And you're over 50% of immigrants that are coming to Canada come to Ontario. There's a direct correlation here. Also, our unemployment nationally, I think, is 6.4%. So don't tell me we don't have people to do the jobs, especially these younger kids. What are you doing? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Again, every time I have this conversation, I feel like I have to contextualize it. But not letting any more foreign workers in the country, not letting any more immigrants, has nothing to do with xenophobia or racism. It has to do with taking care of the Canadians that are here now. 6.4% of the people in this country that want to be employed are unemployed. What are we doing? This does not make any sense. All we're doing is putting more pressure on Canadians and our infrastructure and our system, and it's not getting any better. And that's my big issue with these kinds of things. But again, when you just look at the statistics and you look at the solutions this asshole puts into place, no, we're done.
Yeah, so that solution is to expand the amount of people that can like you were mentioning, apply for permanent residency, and they're making it so they've got that tier system, which is training in education and experience requirements, I believe is what tier stands for. And so they're now allowing people in tier 4 and 5 to apply, and tier 5 is defined as no formal education or several weeks of on-the-job training. So somebody could theoretically have 3 weeks of job experience and now apply in any position and apply for permanent residency.
What do you think is going to happen here? Like, look, we already know these things are corrupt. So if you want to get your people, like, look at the Chinese gangs, look at the triads, look at a lot of the stuff that's happening here from any sort of foreign hostile government, right? They go, hey, we've just opened up our temporary worker program. Great. So what do you do? Well, now I own a business and I need 1,000 temporary foreign workers. Who do I have to pay in the government? Because China's already deeply connected there. Cool. Here's the 1,000 people that I'm going to bring over that are all going to be a part of my gang. Amazing. Well, once they're here for 3 to 4 weeks, we can all apply for PR, right? But I still have those connections with the government. So what's going to happen now? I'm going to make sure I rubber stamp those PRs. So you're great. So what do you think is going to happen with these programs? More and more of these people are going to continue to infiltrate Canada and make it less and less safe. It's like they're already doing it. It's out in the open that they've been doing this.
So actually, Sam Cooper just released a report last week detailing how the head of the global money laundering scheme for those Chinese triads was working out of Toronto.
Yeah.
So like their head of the operations is in Toronto, but one of the aspects is that they have been using Chinese international students as mules. So tasked within Beijing's foreign influence arm, the United Front Work Department, Chinese students are systematically used to deposit fentanyl cash for triads and Mexican cartels into North American banks, Asher said. So not only, are they using this program to get their people in there, but then they're also, once they're in here, they're now using our entire financial systems to, launder their money. It's crazy. It's crazy.
The cascade effect of these decisions is very significant, and it can be hard to really understand the full ramifications of it. I mean, you and I discussed it, but I imagine we're scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of my frustration comes with the current administration.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Liberal government announces 100% tariffs on Chinese-made EVs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced new tariffs on Chinese imports, including a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum products. These measures, effective October 1st for EVs and October 15th for steel and aluminum, aim to counter what Trudeau describes as China's unfair advantage in these sectors. This move aligns Canada with similar actions by the US and the EU, which have imposed or plan to impose high tariffs on Chinese EVs. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan supported a coordinated approach to these trade issues, citing concerns about Chinese subsidies and national security. The announcement follows Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's earlier promise of tariffs and come as the House of Commons Trade Committee plans hearings on the feasibility of such measures. So the Trudeau government wants to outlaw the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035, yet simultaneously wants to place tariffs on the largest supplier of EVs, effectively raising the prices of EVs. Can you help me make sense of this?
No, I absolutely cannot. I can't. I struggle with this conversation all the time. You tell me, look, we can't let these Chinese products into the market because they've got an unfair advantage of being subsidized. Well, it's funny because we subsidize them here too, so that's interesting. Okay, cool. So they've got that advantage, but you have to take these products. So it's like, who's winning here? Who's winning here? I genuinely don't understand how this works. Like, it's sure you want to push more domestic production. I guess what I'm saying is something has to give. I agree with domestic production. I agree with more independence. I really do. I think that would be very, very good for this country because we can actually do it. We can grow our own food. We can do a lot of our own production. It's like after World War II, you'd see Canadian products across all sectors of the market. That's what you would see. And I would love to get back to that place. Now we need to sort of rejig our economics a little bit and curb globalism, but that's how it's got to go. So I'm actually good with this decision, so long as you don't tell me that I need to be driving an EV by 2035
Yes.
with no choice, no option. Because if you push these products out of the market, you force the price up. You also allow the companies that are allowed to have their cars here to sort of collude or price fix within the market because they can control the supply and demand because you're keeping these other guys out. That would make it a more competitive market. It makes zero sense. So my opinion is, yeah, put these tariffs on. Let's do more national production for sure, 100%. But get rid of this stupid idea that I also need to buy one of these vehicles by 2035. Not only like the climate goals and climate agenda stuff, that's nonsense, but just put this in its own silo. You're a fucking idiot if you try to do something like that. Really, you are, right? Because you kind of look at what this does to the economy or the economics around these purchases, and it makes zero sense. So no, and I really can't.
And so I should say that I'm sure it could probably come off as hypocritical to look at it and go, because I've mentioned before that I do agree that we need to start economically separating ourselves from China. It is what has allowed them to get such a influential stranglehold on our systems. But then I do think as well, like I'm just looking at it from his worldview of Trudeau's and in the Liberals' worldview, where they push these things. And then so you see them say, yeah, we want everybody in an EV to save the climate. But then we're going to invest in Canadian battery manufacturers, and then they pull out of that. That plant now doesn't want to go through with it. So like our manufacturing here, people don't even want to manufacture here. And then you're also putting tariffs on the largest supply chain for EVs and saying, okay, nationally, we're having issues producing EVs, but then we're also going to stop the international production of EVs, or at least the sale of them here. And then, so it just doesn't make sense, especially when you even look at the PBO. They recently said how the cost of electric vehicles would have to drop by 31% to meet Ottawa's 2030 sales target. And so they're putting things in there to make it more expensive for those.
Exactly.
It doesn't, so like, again, I actually support these tariffs because even from a national security aspect, when it comes to these EVs and these self-driving cars, I don't think we should have a hostile foreign government or company, which we know that all companies in China are really just an extension, are really just an extension of the CCP. But I don't think we should be giving them control over the self-driving cars.
No,
here. Like
we wouldn't allow them to use it. We wouldn't allow them to sell their phones here. Why are they going to be able to sell these EVs here?
Exactly.
Which, like you said, could be autonomous at some point. Like that could be. What a wild form of warfare. What an advantage. I totally agree. We're on the exact same page. It's tough for me. Like it's like you said, they need the price to drop by 31%, but in the last 5 years, vehicles went up by 30%. So there's no chance that these are going to drop, especially if you're pushing these guys out of the market. And one other thing that's happening too, they're discussing not only putting tariffs on the EVs, but all of the components, so that they couldn't sell the components to a Canadian company and then reproduce here as well. So they're just making it impossible. But this is just one of those things. Like, they say this stuff in the media, or they have these policies to try to make themselves look good because all they want is profit and power. Pretty clear. But when you put this whole thing together, you realize how big of a mess it is. There's no chance. There is a 0% chance that we're going to be driving EVs only by 2035. 0%. The problem is the economy starts moving in that direction because of policy. So it's really just harming us more than anything. Like Ford just dropped they were going to do all these EVs in Canada. So they're taking those subsidies. Now they're going to make they're going to make their their 250, their larger truck. You know what I mean? They're going to start producing those here, which at the end of the day is good. They're going to create some jobs. There's going to be Canadian production. That's fine. But that's a big gas guzzling vehicle versus going the EV direction because the market doesn't even want these things. So this whole thing is just such a disaster. I just find it challenging to see them implement policies that are so opposed to one another with a straight face. Like, how are you doing this?
And also, a week before the Liberals announced that they were imposing these tariffs, Pierre Poilievre said he would, and then Liberals started saying that this is such a crazy idea. How could you ever do this?
Well, Trudeau literally said, this is baloney.
Yeah.
In quotes. Okay, but I'm going to do it 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
All right, dude.
Did you see Trudeau's run-in with one of the steel workers?
I saw part of it, yeah.
We'll play it here quick because it is glorious to just see him just eat his words in front of these people.
Well, we got donuts over here if you want to thank you for your hard work.
I can bring some for my kids here.
Okay. The 25% tariffs we just brought in on Chinese steel to help you out.
That's going to keep my job. Yeah. What about the $40% taxes I'm paying, and I don't have a doctor?
The $400 million that we invested in the card means you're going to have a job.
Well, I think you're only here for another year. We won't see you around probably another year.
That's what elections are for.
That's right.
And I look forward to everyone exercising the right to vote.
Yep.
Basic choice. We're going to invest in you and your jobs.
I don't believe you for a second.
Dental care? Do you know anyone who got dental care?
Yeah, I pay for it myself.
Okay.
We're like 3 years behind.
You have a job and coverage?
Yeah, four people in my family.
We've got
every time we go for a dental visit, it's costing me about $50 in my pocket per person.
Okay.
Why? I have a good job. You're not really doing anything for us, Justin.
Well, actually, we just invested, so 500,000 people haven't been to the dentist. Got to go to the dentist over the past few months.
Probably like my neighbor that doesn't go to work because she's lazy.
Well, you know what?
Doesn't go to work. She lives the same life I do.
Canadians try to stick up for each other, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
Yeah.
Good luck and take care of your family, sir.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right.
Have a nice day.
Have a good day, sir. All right. The other guys got the donuts. Excellent.
Yeah, so I had a buddy of mine that watched that. It's like, oh, they should have taken it easy on him. They should have some decorum. It's the prime minister. And I'm just like, oh, I would have gone 10 times harder. I'd still be there ripping him. There's no way that would have been that easy. So I actually want to give the guy credit too, because usually when you're in those situations, your nerves and your adrenaline can get the better of you.
For sure.
You can get a little shaky and you can't quite keep it together. So yeah, I give the guy credit, man. I think he did a good job. And I'm happy that those kinds of things are spreading. You won't see it on mainstream media, but again, we kind of live off those channels anyway.
Well, one thing that I think is important to point out there where, treat him with a little bit of respect because he's the prime minister. How about Trudeau treats people with a little respect and treats them like a human? Because you look at how he handled that interaction, every aspect that this guy pushed back upon, there was no like, hey, I'd like to get to know you as a citizen of Canada, as a fellow citizen of Canada that I'm putting myself on the same footing as, and I would like to understand what your troubles and your problems are. It's just like every time he raised a issue, it was just talking point, policy talking point. Well, my life is hard because I'm paying 40% in taxes. Well, do you know anyone that got dental care? That is not I'm trying to understand the fact that you are financially struggling. It's, aren't you glad about the programs that you pay all those taxes for? And it's just like a complete dismissal of everything that this guy is saying to you in an effort to essentially propagandize.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Trudeau continues to go into blue collar workplaces, that's the lion's den.
Yeah.
And now these people are emboldened because everybody that's in that guy's network and people that are kind of in that same workspace, they've seen it. And he's going to continue getting more and more of this. So I would be willing to bet anything he had scheduled in those spaces, he will not see him there.
Which is funny because historically it's been conservatives were thought to be the party of the capitalists, of the business owners, and the liberals were thought to be the working class heroes. And now it's like almost a complete reversal of that. And we'll actually see here, getting into our next story. NDP poll numbers plummet as Poilievre pushes Singh to break Liberal deal and call a fall election. A new post-media ledger poll shows the NDP's support plunging by 5 points to 15% over the summer, while the Conservatives maintain a strong lead with 43% nationally. The Liberals trail at 25%. This dip in NDP support could be significant, especially as the party faces a key by-election in Elmwood, Transcona, a historically NDP-held riding. The poll also highlights widespread dissatisfaction with the Trudeau government, with only 28% of respondents expressing any level of satisfaction. Following these polling results, Conservative leader Pierre has urged NDP leader Jagmeet Singh to dissolve his party's agreement with the minority Liberal government and push for a fall election. So, is there anything that can happen which will trigger Singh to break his coalition with Trudeau?
Yeah, so I actually looked into that a little bit this morning because I wanted to see when Jagmeet Singh qualified for his pension. So the Kingmaker, Jagmeet, he got into office as an MP in 2019, and you need to be in office for 6 years to qualify for your pension. So at some point in 2025, he will qualify and he'll get his pension. Now, I was under the impression it would be more money, but I was looking at the calculation today. So he gets $194,000 a year to be a total asshat. So that's good money, though, to do what he's doing. Now, when you retire, if you get your pension after just 6 years in office, based on the math that I looked at, that only gives him about $35,000 a year, which really isn't that much. It's nothing to balk at. Don't get me wrong. It's free money for doing a terrible job for 6 years. He should get nothing. Like you said, we should steal all his possessions, send him into the woods. Cool. But that's not that significant. So I've been kind of living in this space where I'm like, there's no way he breaks the coalition. There's no way, because he wants to get his pension. That being said, the pension's only $35,000 a year. I don't know. I mean, that's not even enough to cover rent. You know what I mean? So I don't, and I mean, from what I understand, he's already got money and he's come from some money. So I don't think he's really struggling anyway. So I don't know. Like, I don't think that he will give it up, because I think his ego is at play, and I think he wants to maintain power as long as possible. So I don't actually think he will. But when it comes to the pension thing, it's actually not that much money. So for me, it's an interesting conversation now, because you could argue that based on that value of $35,000 a year for Canadians, you should immediately pull this coalition. You know what I mean? And I'm sure he could finagle a way to stick around until 2025 if he really wanted to. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, basically inconclusive, if that helps. Look, I think you can depend on people to be who they are. And I think so far he's shown that he's not really willing to break the coalition. But what I will say is I learned something in that the pension's not as significant as I thought. So that's not the only thing that I'm standing on anymore. And basically, I guess what I'm saying is if he does not pull the ripcord on this, then it's primarily for power then, not even profit, really more for power and his ego, which is a little bit sad, but I think there's more wiggle room there. I don't know. What do you think?
Looking at it that way, there would have been a point where, okay, if he could have broken it to save the party's skin, it would make sense. But now he's already had all of the damage. The political damage for the NDP is already done. He's not saving anything at this point. No,
they look like they could fold right into the Liberals almost.
Yeah, well, and I think that might actually be what we end up seeing happening, is them holding on to this, and then 6 months down the line, a year down the line, once they start campaigning for the next election, just do what France, the left-wing parties in France did to beat Marine Le Pen.
Right.
I think you could see something like that happening here, and maybe that's what they're holding on to. But then, even if it is just his pension plan, like 35K isn't enough to whatever get you your champagne socialist lifestyle that he loves, really, right? Like his Gucci watches, and his Gucci handbags, and all this kind of shit. But
Gucci Mane.
At the same time, if the damage is already done, then what's the upside? Like if it was, okay, I can have 30K a year for the rest of my life, or I save my political career and save face on a national scale. Yeah. Then you could go like, okay, but that's already down the drain.
You think there's no coming back for the guy. So I you know what? I'm inclined to agree with you when you say that. At the damage, like you said, if they've lost 25% of their support, you know what I mean? At that 5% drop to 15%. I mean, that's pretty significant. Yeah, you know what? You make a good point. The damage has already been done. I imagine you're right. They've probably got a plan to merge. We've been saying this for a little while though. But yeah, that makes sense to merge before the next election. And they try to, because it's kind of what it has become anyway with this coalition, because they're sort of implementing NDP policies to keep everybody happy, to keep the NDP in line. So the party's already that far left anyway. But what's interesting and not good for Canadians is that this now becomes a two-party system. And now you're looking at the US. That's what that is, right? And the issue you have there is then it becomes a lot less about policy and a lot more about ideology, like long term. And I know we're suffering from that right now in Canada, but that really does sort of take the checks and balances away. So, I mean, that's not really a good look for us.
Yeah, if it keeps going on this path, we're going to have to start putting these into everybody versus Trudeau and Singh.
V2, let's go. Yeah, you know what? Actually, if they do something like this, it might be time to start a political party.
Yeah.
Just saying.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the secret socialist plot to oust Danielle Smith from the UCP. A whistleblower has exposed an undercover campaign designed to manipulate the United Conservative Party leadership review by recruiting left-wing Albertans to join the party and vote against Premier Danielle Smith. The whistleblower, Rob Fillion, was hired by Canadian Market Surveys, a shadowy organization not registered with Elections Alberta. The group targeted LGBTQ2IA+ individuals in Red Deer offering them cash incentives to register for and attend the UCP convention, with the expectation that they would vote to remove Smith as a punishment for her conservative policies. Filion participated in the campaign for one evening, but quickly became uncomfortable with its deceptive tactics and the dubious legality of its operations. He noted that the organizers seemed unconcerned about where their funding came from or whether their actions were legal, as long as they achieved their goal of undermining Smith's leadership. The operation lacked transparency, with no formal office and meetings held in public parks, further raising doubts about its legitimacy. Ultimately, Filion decided to go public to expose what he saw as a blatant attempt to subvert the democratic process by using left-wing voters to influence the leadership of a conservative party. So, how do you beat a team that refuses to play by the rules?
It's interesting. I guess you really only have one of two choices, right? You can take the moral high ground and believe that you're going to win through policy and by doing the right thing. However, in this game of politics, how often does that work? It's the RFK approach, which I love. I love it. I just don't know if you're bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? So you look at this situation, it's like, yeah, they got lucky to find these people, but there's going to be more organizations trying to do the same thing. You know, these sort of subversion tactics. It's challenging if you're not willing to play by the same rules. It can be tough. But then you get into this really, really messy situation where you go eye for an eye, everybody's blind. So I actually don't even know what the right solution is here. Like, I'm glad that this was brought up and found and it went away. And to be honest with you, like, if she was ousted and all of a sudden the party had blue hair and a bunch of them were in the LGBT community, it'd be pretty clear what was going on. And another party would hopefully form or something like that. But like, I don't even really know what the ramifications of something like this are. At the end of the day, it might be nothing because you can vote however you want. You know what I mean? You can sort of infiltrate a party and take action that way, I guess. It's just very deceitful and not a good place to see Canadian politics. And what's maybe more concerning is this isn't municipal, this is provincial politics. This is and Danielle Smith is the one sort of leading the way for all conservative politicians at the provincial level. So this is actually it's pretty deep. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, well, I wanted my uncle to win this election, so we did this and this and this to, win this mayoral campaign in this small town of 40,000 people. It's the entire province. And a lot of people, it's the province that has got the most new people moving to it because most Canadians prefer this way of life. It seems that's the direction it's going anyway. The people that are moving there, if you had to think about the scale of people moving in and out. I'm not really sure how you beat these people, but I do think that if this becomes commonplace, the Canadian political landscape might get pretty violent.
And one thing that's important to note about them is they don't actually even respect the principles or the rules of the Western world that we are supposed to live by. So you can't expect them to play by them. Their whole goal is to get rid of these things. When you look at, say, the freedom of speech or the current processes and institutions that we use in the West, they think of these things as inherently oppressive, and so they need to be overthrown and ripped down. So why would they respect the rules of the game, right? They want to end the game. And this kind of goes to that thing where it's like, you can vote socialists in, but you can never vote socialists out. Because as soon as they get in, they go, okay, well, this democratic process is oppressive to the worker class or the oppressed class. And obviously it's changed. It's not the workers anymore. It's the LGBTQI plus and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we need to get rid of free speech because people can misgender these people. And so the whole thing is that they'll weaponize these principles against us, make sure that we uphold them because, and hey, I am of the idea, it's like, if you have principles, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Right.
Like, without your principles, what are you? Like,
I agree.
You're just playing a power game. Actually, and this is really important because if you have principles, you're not playing a power game because you hold yourself to certain standards. But these people only see the lens through, or the world through a lens of power. Everything to them is a power.
By any means necessary. This is the challenge you're up against, right? So it's like, how do you win this war when evil people are willing to do evil things and you have a higher moral code? Look what happens. I mean, look, a good example, honestly, is RFK. He's a lifetime Democrat. He wanted to run the Democratic Party. He was ousted by the Democratic Party because of the crazy rules that they put in that were completely undemocratic. He had no choice but to leave the party and run as an independent. And then the media continue to smear the guy and smear the guy and smear the guy. No chance. They're talking about him cutting a head off a whale and putting a bear in a park that was dead and all these other things. And sure, they're bad things. I don't know all the stories behind this stuff. But what I mean is all they did was try to dig up dirt on this guy the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we have to, so like they will do evil things. And he continued to hold his head high and be decent. Now he's had to switch all the way over to the other side and support Trump because he goes, oh my God, this party is insane. They're going to ruin this country. They're willing to do evil things. Those are the people you're fighting with. So this is a challenge. Like you want to maintain your sort of moral, just your morality. You want to maintain whatever code of ethics that you have. But these people are playing this game and the stakes are incredibly high. Freedom of the nation. So what do you do?
It's so insane when you realize how unprincipled these people are when they believe that the very concept of truth is a oppressive tactic and is rooted in white supremacy.
Exactly.
And this and that. And you go, okay, so like how this is where I've got to, because I'm sure over the next period and I've really been debating this, is going like, we'll start probably getting pressure on us to have certain conversations with people that disagree with us. And I'd like to do that because I'd like to have a debate and let's go, okay, let's have a discussion of ideas. But like, I'm not too interested in sitting down with socialists or communists because like, if you don't respect the very concept of truth, how are we going to sit down and have a conversation about truth? The entire thing to you is a score points. There would be no conversation.
Well, you guys like you and I, if we can keep our calm and be tactful, we can highlight or uncover their tactics. You know what I mean? We can make them look the way that you and I understand them to be to the general public. Now, that doesn't mean, here's the thing. I believe that our audience already sees things the same way, so our impact may be minimal. But if you put them in a room with us and they're going to have a conversation, we're going to put them in a very tough spot.
Yeah.
Because they do not bank on logic. They do not bank on reason. They do not bank on knowing as much as you and I have had to learn to have these conversations. They bank on being able to manipulate the truth and do evil things. Those are pretty easy people to expose. So I would be open to the conversation. And I think that's exactly what we would accomplish. However, I don't think our reach is significant enough to make enough of a difference. But anyway.
They don't see things in terms of absolute morality or objective morality. To them, it's if it champions the cause, if it helps our team, it's good. If it helps anybody who is against us, it's bad. And again, it goes back to that exact same thing with even the EV stuff, right? It's like a week before when Poilievre is talking about it, they're going down his throat, using it to slander him, say how dumb these ideas are. And then a week later, they implement those ideas. It's like, you have no standards. You just have power tactics.
That's exactly it. So, yeah.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add today?
That is everything.
Don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can find original articles, exclusive podcasts, and direct access to us here at Blendr News. The link is in the description below. It very much helps support us and what we are doing. So if you wouldn't mind subscribing there, that would be greatly appreciated. And if not, we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.